All right. I think this is the part where I get started. So I'm super excited for the session today. And like I said, I'm really just guessing that this is the part where I get started. Um, so, nevertheless, super excited to jump into it. We actually have 30 minutes here, and 30 minutes is not a lot of time to go into all the things that I have to cover here. So, we'll jump right in. Uh, for those who don't know me, my name is Maceo, and I go by the ERG homegirl. Her pronouns, and I truly am all things employee resource groups. I probably should learn more so how to use the chat, but put in the chat if you've heard of an ERG. So if you're an ERG member, or put member if you're a member of one, or leader if you're a leader of one. I think will be helpful based on this session, which is really talking about how you can leverage ERGs to grow your career without necessarily having to burn yourself out. So I'm super excited to get into this. High level things about me to know. I've led ERG programs at big tech companies, so I think it's very fitting me speaking here today. Super excited for it. Beyond that, I've also been featured in Forbes and some other publications for my work with ERGs. And I just do a lot of work with ERG leaders, such as I have a free ERG community called ERG Champs, put out a ton of ERG resources. So I get around in the space. Long story short, I think that this is a topic that I can safely say I can probably speak to. So that being said, when we're talking about growing your career, a couple of things to touch on. I think thing one, I can do a high level of kind of like my story and the most abbreviated version. I will say, once upon a time, I was just a support agent at a big tech company, like very entry level, zero college. Honestly, I think I was about to quit, and then I just so happened to stumble across ERGs. And while, yes, a lot of the things that I'm mentioning in this presentation, you could apply even just as an ERG member, I will truly say by being an ERG leader, that is taking it to the next level where you can get so much out of being an ERG leader. Now, for me, I'm sure you all know there's a need, a lack of representation oftentimes in tech, whether it's from the Latin American and Hispanic community or even like the Black community. For me, that's what I saw at the tech company. And for me, so when I saw that there was a Black ERG, I was like immediately, yes, I would love to be a lead of this ERG. Had no idea what I was signing up for, which I think a lot of people are like that when they first get into the space. But ultimately, I bring that up to say, within the next year, the connections that I made within the ERG, the skills that I obtained within the ERG, it actually landed me my first salaried role at that company. So I was making then over double what I was making before. Actually, I think maybe like 1.5 times. No, 2.5 times. Sorry, my math is off. What I was making before. So that was already big enough. And not even more so, via leveraging ERGs, I was eventually able to double my salary again the next year. So ERGs definitely did have an impact on me in my life. But beyond that, I'm not the only person. I can give you an example. Someone that I worked with who was an ERG leader, who was a communications lead at a big tech company, also support agent. So just so you know, this does work for people of all different backgrounds. It's not just something where you have to already be senior to benefit from ERGs. But with this, because she was the communications lead, we were able to use some of the tips that we're going to talk about today to actually help her connect what she was doing with the role that she wanted. And actually, within a year of doing that, she was able to land her first salaried role working in internal communications. Last example, just because it's one of my favorites, and it is a group in tech. But there's an ERG at Intuit where almost all of their ERG leaders, and I'll just say on their global leadership team, there's about 6 folks, and all of them were able to move into a different role based on their work with ERGs. So yes, ERGs do. I mean, they can definitely be used to help to improve your career and to kind of change things for you. And that is essentially what I'm speaking about here today. So going into it, I would just say all this sounds nice, but I will say that there are a lot of pain points right now within the ERG space. In particular, within the ERG champs community, these are the top pain points that I've seen from ERG leaders and heard them voice. And honestly, they're able to actually rank this as they join the community. And with that, burnout from ERG leaders is very prevalent, and also from members as well. Oh, I finally learned where the chat is. I love that. Okay. Anyway, I just made a discovery. But all that being said, right now, because burnout is a major issue within the ERG space, it's important that as yes, we're trying to grow our career, that we don't do it in a way that exhausts ourselves. And I will just say, I have been that ERG leader who was willing to do everything for the ERG just to keep it afloat. However, that is not necessarily the best way, and there are easier, better ways to do it. That being said, I also believe that running an ERG program like a business is the thing that actually helps to streamline a lot of your work. So, with that being said, normally this is a little bit more interactive, and I know I'm delayed. And because we only have 30 minutes, it'll be a little bit less interactive. But just know, I'm a big fan of shows such as these. If you haven't seen them before, my favorite of them all, because they're all relatively the same, where a successful business person goes into an unsuccessful business and gives them a framework on how to set up the business for success. In the same way, I'm a big fan of The Profit. It's the same exact show, except for this billionaire entrepreneur, Marcus Lemonis, goes into businesses, and he uses this 3P framework really to help folks to set up their business for success. In the business world, it's people, process, product, but in the ERG space, I like to refer to this as purpose, process, programming. Quick overview, because this is essentially the framework, and we'll talk about a couple of frameworks today, actually, but this is honestly, if nothing else you take away from this presentation, this is a framework that can be used honestly in so many different teams, but in particular, I use it when it comes to ERGs with getting on the same page and how to get the ERG program on track. High level, what it means. Number one, purpose, understanding why the ERG program exists, and also what are the parameters of the ERG program. One part of not burning out is not doing work that's not in line with the program's purpose. For instance, I have been an ERG leader, and I've witnessed many others do the same thing, where they want to champion an initiative for their company through their employee resource group. For those, I never defined it. So for those who don't know what ERGs are, employee resource groups. So sometimes as ERG leads, we want to change things at the company, but we don't have even alignment from the company and that's what the company wants. So we might get so far with planning something out, but it could get shut down at the last minute because we're not aligned on the purpose of the program. So to not waste your efforts, this is so important. Really understanding what are the metrics that the ERG program is here to change. What is the strategy that we have for this program? Beyond that, there's also process. So that's really understanding your governance structure, your SOPs. So really breaking down what does it look like for each person to show up for this ERG. We'll discuss it a little bit more. But I like to say, if I were to go volunteer at a food bank, they're not just going to go tell me to go do. They're going to tell me what to do and how to do it. And I'm going to have all the steps. And this doesn't exist within the ERG space, which is largely why a lot of burnout occurs. And then finally, programming, which those are like the events that we do within the ERG space. Those are the communications that we post within our Slack and our Teams channel. However, these 3Ps are meant to be tackled in order. And unfortunately, for so many companies, when they launch their ERG programs, they completely skip the first two and jump right into, hey, we have an ERG. What's our first event going to be? What are you all posting in channel? And as a result of that, honestly, that's why there is so much burnout and low engagement within ERGs. So I'm a big fan of using this framework and actually going back and maybe revamping, refreshing the program using this exact framework. And you all will see as ERG leaders how this applies within your role in the space. All right, so all that being said, we have a good framework. What are we going to be discussing today? A couple of things. We'll talk about the opportunity, which actually we can cross that off because we already did that. I share with you all, I'm not the only person who's used ERGs to really up level their career. And honestly, I just shared a few examples, but I know so many folks who said ERGs have truly changed my life. And that's the effect that I want for you all too. But again, without the burnout. So you all know there is an opportunity. Now we'll go into the W performance statement. And if you checked out my LinkedIn post earlier today, if you haven't, I mean, I recommend it. Still good things in there, but we are going to be covering those things there in terms of um, why a lot of ERG leaders are struggling with tying their ERG leadership, volunteer duties, and the things that you do to their role, and essentially the perfect statement that you all can use to help to connect the dots. So we'll break that down, and then I'll even give you 3 bonus tips to take into your journey as an ERG leader. All right, here we go. All that being said, the thing I want to kick off with, a phrase that I really, really love. If you confuse, you lose. That's one. I like to have these fun little sayings that you can write down and take with you. This is big for the ERG space because right now a lot of managers are confused, and oftentimes as ERG leaders they want to tell their managers what they're doing and they feel like I'm not being appreciated, my manager doesn't get it, or maybe we'll use manager for this conversation, but maybe even you do want to switch roles, maybe you do want to get into a different department, but you just don't know how to articulate how this work helps to justify or to say that you're qualified for this new role. We'll touch on it, but the point is I'm going to use manager, but just know this also applies if you're looking for a new role or if you're trying to appeal to maybe a future manager that you want to have. So that is what we're going to discuss today. And like I said, if you confuse, you lose is so important to take away because right now a lot of people are lost, and we'll talk about why. I like to say that if you want to equip folks, if you want to best explain the work that you do within ERGs, that you want to make sure that you equip people with the language to understand what you do and why it matters. And this is a huge gap right now in the ERG space. There is no one language that we all speak. I think like I said, it's a gap within the ERG space. So I am going to equip you all with this language. This way you can paint the picture for your manager or whomever you're trying to appeal to. And with that, there's typically 4 reasons I've seen around why folks disconnect when it comes to ERGs. So with that, this is going to be kind of the second framework that we go into so that we can understand how can we break down our role as an ERG leader to make it make sense, to help connect the dots, and really to form that W performance statement that we'll talk about shortly. For the first reason for the disconnect is that they don't know that they don't get ERGs at all. So while they know that they exist, they don't know what they are. And sometimes this feels impossible for us as ERG leaders. We're like, how do you not know that there's an ERG or what it is? You should know these things. But to be honest, that's the thing. It's almost like we're in our own little bubble sometimes. So when it comes to getting ERGs and going back to what I just mentioned about how we have to provide the language sometimes, a couple considerations for us to have. Going back to that other framework, the 3 Ps, purpose, why does your ERG program exist? You should have not only the answer to this, but it should be the same answer for every single ERG leader under your ERG program. You all should be communicating using the same language. Again, making it easier for managers to understand what the program is. And right now, it's too common where different people think the program exists for different reasons. And then it's no wonder why the manager is confused on, okay, I don't quite get what we're doing here. So even going back and talking about that framework that we used or we talked about earlier, make sure that you have the answers to this question. And if you have an ERG program manager, definitely leverage them to help paint that picture very clearly on why this program exists. Now, beyond just this, because I already told you all about having the purpose of the program. 1, setting the tone. Thing 2, you want to actually give some context. So yes, maybe they have like your program purpose statement or your vision statement. So they have that and you're arming them with this, but you can also give them some extra context in that as well. So not just saying, hey, this is what our ERG program is, but also here's the ERGs that exist. Here's how long we've had them. Here's the ones that I'm a part of. help them to paint the picture. Again, the easier it is, the easier we make it for them to paint the picture, the more likely that they actually will get the picture. Okay, don't worry, we'll get into some ways to really help articulate this shortly. Also linking to more information, which means, yes, we have to actually probably have an updated intranet page. And I get it, they are such a pain. So I know why intranet pages typically are not updated. But make sure that we actually have that when we're supplying our managers with information about the work that we do, especially if our managers internal. Obviously, there's pain points that come with, like, if you are trying to put this on your resume. But in general, if it is your manager that you're just trying to get to understand the work that you do, making sure that you link to that. Even then, I'll just say when it comes to intranet pages, this is how I first found out about my first ERG. And honestly, if it wasn't for me stumbling across an intranet page, I probably wouldn't know what they are to this day. So I get that they're a pain to update, but they truly do make a difference in people helping to get the picture. Okay, that one was simple. Give them the basics. But now, what about what you do? Do your managers actually get what you do for the ERG? You say that I'm an ERG lead, but what does that mean? What does it encompass? And going back to what I mentioned earlier, if you confuse, you lose. And again, a lot of managers right now are a little bit confused. I'll paint the picture with an illustration. Let's just say that I was volunteering at a food bank. And with that, I was telling a friend of mine, hey, I'm one of the head volunteers at this food bank. And then she asks, okay, well, what do you do there? Now, with this, oftentimes this is what happens with ERGs, or actually, I'm not even going to do the food bank illustration. I'm going to make it much more simpler and use ERGs, but you can kind of see it as we go. So for a lot of ERG leaders, oftentimes it's, well, I plan the meetings, so that's one aspect. And I also post within our channel, so I make sure that people like know what's happening. And I kind of create a strategy for our program too. Not to mention, I also greet new members as they join. And I manage the budget too. When we start adding all these things that we do, or even worse, when we are that catch-all person for our ERG, it can be very confusing to the person listening, especially to our manager. And if we're trying to say, hey, we're doing things that help to provide a lot of value for this ERG, if we're doing all these things, our manager might be like, this feels like it's a huge time consume. And again, there's no clear connection between the work that you do and the outcome, how it even benefits the ERG, because you're doing a little bit of everything. And this is someone who's probably newer to ERGs. Instead, again, this is the biggest mistake that I see for ERG leaders, but truly the better approach is to be a professional in one of these things instead of trying to do everything. Really be really, really good at one thing in particular. So now, if I was to just say, well, I do the events, I host events for the ERG members. Well, that makes it a lot easier for the manager to understand versus me trying to explain the 10, 20 different things that are incorporated in ERG, in running an ERG in general. So that's what's going to help your manager to paint the picture. And that is why, going back to that 3P framework, processes are so important. I know that sometimes we just say, well, the ERG was very informal, very grassroots, so we don't really need to know, or we don't need a handbook. But essentially, by you having processes, or AKA a very strong volunteer governance structure, it'll make it so much easier for you to take ownership of one aspect of the ERG. This way, you can really speak to this specific aspect and how it ties to your role. I like to say clarity takes commitment. So you have to select one thing. You have to get very clear on where you sit within the ERG and your strong suits. High level, this is what it can look like. Feel free to take a screenshot in doing this. 1, reflect. Think for yourself. What are my specialties? What are the things that I'm good at? / if you are looking to move into a new department, like I mentioned, what are the things that I would like to be good at, essentially? Now, once you have the answer there, That's where you can really understand what is the task-based role that you can do to tie back into the things that you're good at. So for instance, going back to the person that I mentioned that moved into internal comms at a big organization where she was actually one of the senior people of internal comms when she moved over from being a support leader. It's because she really liked posting and connecting with people. And ultimately, we were able to work together and say, well, that really sounds a lot like what a communications person does. And we were able to then carve out her lane as leading communications within an ERG. And then again, it makes it that much easier to translate into what does it look like to lead communications within a company. Or even for those who maybe you want to go from an IC role and now you want to go into management, you want to manage others. Well, as an ERG chair or ERG project manager, whatever you might call that role where you're leading other ERG leads, well, now you can now speak to, well, really my whole thing is to kind of project manage this ERG and make sure that I'm a people manager of folks. And then it'll help again to paint that picture. I want you to then list out what are all the components of being a lead within this specialty in particular. Once you have a pretty good list, it'll make it that much easier for you to simplify that list and really group what are the top 3 things, like the major 3 things that I do. And then I like to say add a little bit of finesse. So you might have to change the wording a little bit. This is where I'm a big fan of AI, but you can change the wording. So maybe it's not saying I post within my channel. Maybe it's I create opportunities on a regular cadence for members to feel like they can be themselves or for employees to feel that sense of belonging at the company through X, Y, and Z strategies. But you see how one sounds a little bit better and it sounds a little bit more strategic, not just better. So couple things in what you can do to help people to get the picture here. And again, this is really around getting clarity on what you do within an ERG and not trying to be the person who does everything, because that is also going to make it easy for you to burn out. Also, just so you know, by you documenting these things, it will make it so much easier for the next person who comes in. So even when you're no longer a lead, this will still be incredibly helpful here. Another piece, they don't get how much you do. Now this is where the metrics come in. And if you don't know me, I'll just say I'm a big fan of having metrics within an ERG space. High level, I'll just say there are 3 different types of metrics when it comes to an ERG. There's the metrics that measure your activity as a lead. So going back to posting, because I guess that's what's on my mind today. Not just I post in channel, but posting 3 times a week or 12 times monthly. That input metric is essentially you saying how much of what you do, putting a number to what you do. Outcome metrics is really around measuring the results. So by you posting in channel 3 times a week, what's your ideal engagement score that you would want to look for? We're not diving too much into it because, like I said, we have so much to cover in so little time. But essentially, these are metrics that you already have access to that so many ERG leaders don't leverage. And again, we're talking about how you can get the most out of ERG leadership without burning out. I'll say a huge piece is not focusing on the data that you don't have, but really getting the most out of the data that you do have. That being said, at the bottom, you'll see inspo metrics. That is essentially those D&I metrics that I know we all want. We want to know the retention of our community at the company. However, oftentimes we don't get that as ERGs. So instead of like being stuck on that, I would say truly get the most out of the data that you have and use this. And honestly, by you doing this consistently and using this, and you'll see it in that W statement, how it can show up, it will help for you to maybe one day even get those inspo metrics. Also, typically there is a strategy, and it's not even just about having the numbers, but it's also articulating, well, this, we're not just putting numbers to it, but we're being strategic about our goals. That's why you have to have a hypothesis. I know we're rushing through this right now. And honestly, I didn't even realize how short 30 minutes was until like now. So just know screenshots of the slides, they're okay. But with that, you have to have a hypothesis of what you're doing. Where are you at now? Where do you want to be? And what are you going to get from point A to point B? I didn't mean to make that rhyme, but I'm glad it does. That being said, I'm talking about this in the context of ERGs, but even largely, these are things that you can leverage even in your day job as well. But essentially, you should have, again, some sort of strategy. Hey, this is the thing that we're going to do to change to get from point A to point B. That is where the strategy piece comes in. And when you apply strategy into the things that you do within ERGs, again, it makes the numbers more meaningful when you go to talk about it. Lastly, why folks disconnect, or why oftentimes the managers disconnect when we're trying to tell them about our work, is that they don't get why it matters. And this might feel obvious too, but again, if it feels obvious, I'm just going to say you should probably bake it out even more. Lots of things that you can leverage to help to paint the picture, whether it's giving your managers context on why you originally became an ERG leader and how that can also show up in other members, or even testimonials from those members in particular. Screenshot, truly, when members do reach out to you and say, wow, this really changed my day. You really made my week with this. I feel so seen with this event. Screenshot those, add them to your portfolio, aka like your brag folder that you can leverage later again when talking to your manager. Make sure that you have pictures and even small video clips for your managers to view from past events. This way, again, it'll help to paint the picture. And then even talk about how it's impacted you personally, and talk about what are the skills that you've gained. All these things really help to paint the picture for people who don't know what ERGs are, even if they still don't fully get what ERGs are. At least when they have why it matters, what you do, then there's a strategy behind the numbers, it feels more professional, which might help it to be easier to kind of digest. Now, putting it all together, we talked about the W statement because I said if you confuse, you lose. And I don't want you all to lose. I want you all to win. And that's where the W comes from. So what's the winning statement that I typically recommend for ERG leads? Well, we talked about the hypothesis. By doing this thing, by doing this input metric, so by doing this thing, we are going to impact this outcome metric. So we're going to impact this metric by X percentage. Let me reread that. And just as it's written, doing this input will impact this outcome by this percentage. Now, all you have to do is reverse that, and then you get your performance statement. So now you just say, well, I increased this outcome metric, channel engagement score, for instance. I increased our Slack channel engagement by 30% by strategically post. I don't know what you put back there. It's really, that's really where you can get into the fun, creative things and the ways that you help to increase that metric. But truly, this statement right here, I've used in performance reviews, I've used in resumes, really just speaking about me as an ERG leader. And I will say it's truly been a game changer. So even outside of ERG leadership, I still recommend every single point on your resume and within your performance review, having metrics tied to it and you speaking about what strategic things you did to impact those metrics. Complete game changer. I'll even give you a bonus. I said there's 4 reasons to disconnect. And as I was kind of coming up with the slides, I came up with a 5th. You have to speak the language. Okay. Now, when I say that thing, 1, company values, incorporate company values into this statement to help paint the picture. That's the company language. And additionally, speak to, and we kind of already touched on this, but speak to the relevancy of what you're doing and how it ties back to your current or your desired role. So you might just have to make that extra step and say, oh, well, yes, I helped to increase our Slack engagement. And it was meaningful for X, Y, and Z reasons. And then you can add at the end of that statement too. And I was able to then leverage those learnings into my day role. And then you can give maybe a metric that you moved based off of the things that you learned from ERG leadership. So when you really incorporate all that, and this is a way where you can kind of put it all together. And that's why I say the W performance statement, technically we already did X, Y, and Z. So we need another letter anyway. So this is truly the W, saying first the value, and then with a semicolon, you can use that X, Y, and Z statement there. I have 1 minute left. So really quickly, I'll say other things when it comes to how you can get the most out of ERGs. Make sure that you leverage your network. executive sponsors. I would not be where I was if it was not for the executive sponsor of the ERG that I led. So make sure you communicate with them your career goals, your fellow leads. I also wouldn't be here where I am if I didn't have other folks where I was able to bounce ideas and questions off of that were also ERG leaders. And even ERG members can come in handy as well. I also like to say be loud, aka be seen. The visibility that comes with ERG leadership is such an underrated tool. You can literally volunteer and you can become one of the most known people at the company. When I tell you all, there are so many perks with that. Happy to chat offline on some tips there on what it looks like to be loud. And then lastly, for everyone here, make sure that you join the ERG Champs space. That's my tip number 3. And hopefully that was helpful here. But with the ERG Champs, I share tips like these often. We have in person and virtual events to make ERG leadership easier for you. So that is all I have for today. Hopefully this was helpful. Hopefully you're able to take some things away when it comes to ERG leadership and how you can leverage that to really grow your career. Thanks for having me.